All right, I'm going to hit the start webinar button and I'm going to put the arrival music on, which I need to just reshare my screen sound for. Okay, here we go and start webinar. Good evening, everybody. My name is James Hasler. Welcome once again to the 66th Annual General Meeting of APRA. It's once again my pleasure to be your producer here this evening. Now, before we get underway, we have a few items of housekeeping, and I apologise in advance if I'm teaching any of you to suck eggs, because we have been doing this now for a couple of years. But if you're using a PC, a laptop or a Mac, when you move your mouse over the screen, you should see 3 buttons appear at the base of your display. If you're using a tablet or an iPad and you tap your screen, you should see these buttons appear probably at the top of the display. And if you're using a mobile phone, then chances are they may well be appearing down one side. The 3 buttons are Q&A, raise hand, and chat, and we'll be using them in the following fashion once again this evening. The Q&A is what we're going to be monitoring specifically for questions on items of agenda. However, please can you wait until we're discussing the relevant point of agenda before putting your question into this feature. If you put your question in before, for say item number 8, and we're still on item number 3, when we get to that question, we may end up missing it because it'll have got lost when we eventually reach the item in question. So please, as I say, wait until we reach the point in the agenda before you add your question for it. The raise hand function will be used when proposing and seconding motions, but not for voting. And the final button, of course, is the chat button. And we will be using this in respect to direct messaging either of myself, James, if you have a problem of any kind technically and you need me to answer a question for you. But also you can communicate with other members of the committee if necessary. But please do not put agenda applicable questions in here. We're not monitoring it for that purpose. Please use the Q&A for that, as mentioned before. Finally, we will be using polling questions again for agenda items that require a vote. So please note that if you've already sent in a vote by proxy and that we can see that you are here this evening, we will be ignoring your proxy vote and taking your live vote this evening. Okay, so please do vote tonight, even if you sent us a proxy. We'll spot that you're in the room by your email address. Anyway, that's enough from me. Once again, it is my pleasure to be a part of this, but I'm now going to hand you over to your chairman this evening, and they, of course, are John and Tej.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 66th Annual General Meeting. I'm John Erskine, as James just mentioned, and Hartej Jagdev. We are your relatively new co-chairs. With us tonight, we've also got Greg Smith, our company secretary, Brian Welsh, who handles our development committee, Sally Morris, Fiona, who does much of our administration, Pat Barnes, our treasurer, and Rakesh Muria. Quite an agenda today. There are some major items, one in particular, which is the long-awaited and discussed boundaries report. We have already circulated, as you will have seen, the chairman's statement. But before we ask you to accept it as read, we've got a few remarks on it, because there are some issues we've not been able to address. So I'd like, those are, and in fact, unfortunately, we weren't able to complete the home base gate litigation review, as we had said we would in December. There are reasons for that, and we will be doing that. The other item we wanted to raise, because we haven't replied directly to all of your emails, although some of them we have, and some will be covered by the agenda items. But I think Tej just wanted to say a few words on both those emails that aren't covered and the litigation report. But also at the beginning, I want to take this opportunity to thank the work of the boundaries demarcation group for their diligence and their hard work in trying to come to the best solution of what is a tricky problem, because there's so many different interests, whether it's Elmbridge or traffic consultants or residents or rights of way. And your committee believes that the solution they've come to is both an attractive one from the point of view of cost, and also from the quality of the contractors we believe we selected. And we recommend that project to you. So Tej, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to give everyone a warm welcome to proceedings this evening. I'd also like to reiterate our thanks to everyone that's been involved on the project delivery group, and also to members that took the time to send questions in advance of the meeting. We shared them amongst the rest of the council and the PDGs so that the answers can be covered in any subsequent presentations. We'll assume that members have read the chairman's statement that was included in the report of COM, but I would like to again express my apologies for the delay in the home base gate lessons learned paper. We are yet to schedule discussions with the successful claimants, and this is something that we're planning to do once this AGM is behind us. We're aiming to finalise the paper before the end of June, and would like to circulate it to members shortly thereafter. So we've got a fairly important and packed agenda, as John said, and I think without further delay, I'll hand over to our company secretary, Greg Smith, to run through some formalities. I think James is just going to switch the spotlight over to Greg.
Good evening, everybody. Just as Tej shares some formalities, just to let you know, we have received 5 specific apologies for this evening's meeting. They are from Janet and Martin Evans of number 19, John and Lynn Ty of 34, Matt and Tina Tanner White of 56, Andy Robertson of 120, and Gilly Charkin of 150. In total, we have 43 members who've cast their proxy votes for this evening's meetings. As James said, some members have voted by proxy and registered for the meeting as well. So just to reiterate, if you have done both, you need to vote at the meeting because your proxy vote won't be counted. On I will. The screen will be coming back to me on the agenda items 6 to 9, which require a poll, and I will calculate these in with the proxy votes received and give you a result at the end of each poll. And I will announce these under each agenda item. So that's it from me for the moment. So back to the chairs, I think.
Next item on the agenda is the previously circulated minutes of the AGM Part 2 held on the 13th of December last year. I'll just ask if there are any points in those minutes which members thought were omitted, any major items, or if there were any inaccuracies or further comments that they wish to make. Okay. So if there is nothing further, could I ask that someone proposes that we accept the minutes?
Neil
If you would raise a hand.
Neil Livingston has proposed.
Thank you.
And I'm just going
could
to
I ask for a seconder?
So this is raise hands, folks. So whoever's quickest on the raise hands.
Raise hands, yes.
Michael Robinson is seconding.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is to receive the council's report and to take questions on those parts that are not covered elsewhere. Do we have any questions?
We have.
So just in the interest of time, we'll assume that members will take the report as read. As mentioned earlier, we did receive questions in advance from members, which we'd like to run through initially, although some are covered in the subsequent sections of the agenda later on. One of the initial emails that we received was from a resident that was asking whether the council believed that the proposed gates impact any public or private rights of access. But we do not believe that there would be any impact on any rights of way. Firstly, we don't believe there are any registered public rights of way over the estate. There have been assertions made in the past, but we've not received any evidence of them. There was also the very recent Elmbridge Borough Council planning applications for both the barriers themselves and the 125 Silverdale Avenue plot split, where the council accepted that the roads in Ashley Park are private. We should also clarify that the barriers as proposed will rise on approach of any vehicle, and the pedestrian gates will allow free access. So there is no significant interference proposed with the rights of way. Therefore, we did feel that it was unnecessary to incur the additional costs of taking a legal opinion. I think if there were going to be access controls or any change to the flow of traffic, we may have considered that option, but it wasn't necessary here. The same questioner also asked that the home-based litigation cost the estate nearly £500,000 or £2,500 per house. Is a lesson learnt being that similar disputes should be avoided going forward? I would say that a lesson has certainly been learned, and we should almost certainly avoid legal action where possible. But I would say that APRA has to retain the right of legal action when trying to ensure that the interests of members are protected. But obviously, all the steps that we've taken with regards to the boundaries demarcation have been to avoid any controversy or any challenge legally. We were also asked by two Ashley Park Crescent residents who wrote in separately whether Ashley Park Crescent residents had been specifically and separately consulted about the proposals for barriers. And we didn't really want to go down the route of a separate consultation for the Crescent, although there was an informal consultation carried out by 2 residents who live on the Crescent. The results that we were privy to suggested that slightly over 70% of the residents that were asked were in favour of the proposals. However, what we wanted to reiterate tonight was that we do see the project as an estate-wide project for everybody in the community, and we'd like to ensure that APC is treated equally to the rest of the estate, and therefore the proposals include APC as have been outlined in all the documents that we've sent out. Unless anybody else has any other questions, we should probably move on to the next agenda.
I think there were just a few more, couple of ones on how the pedestrian gates will work, and the changes to Tudor gates, but I think those will be covered during the main presentation on that subject. And there was one more from a resident wanted to know what our plans were for CCTV, which perhaps would be partially covered under the boundaries presentation, in that we are taking advantage of box broadband to upgrade the quality and speed and capability of that. But there isn't a specific plan right now on the council for the future development of CCTV. I think that's right, isn't it, Tej?
Yes, yeah, and that will all be outlined in more detail in the boundaries presentation.
Yeah. So,
okay. If there's no other questions, then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
We have one other question just popped up.
Oh, yeah, we've just received a question from Andrew Walton, who's saying one item not covered is the speed of traffic on the estate. It's not something that we have been looking at recently, Andrew, but if you have got concerns about speeding incidences on the estate, then please do get in touch in the usual way, and we can investigate further. But it's not been a sort of agenda item that we've been looking at recently.
Just to let you know, James Spalding's noted in the chat as well with reference to CCTV. I don't know if you can just check the chat.
Oh yeah, okay. So James Spalding is saying that his question was about CCTV. The boundaries are separate. The CCTV are not fit for purpose. So we've been in contact with Visionon, who are the CCTV suppliers to the estate. The CCTV equipment does have a finite life, and there is a replacement cycle. We've recently had to replace one of the cameras since John and I got involved in the committee, and there will be a sort of upgrade cycle as the equipment becomes obsolete. Obviously, we're installing a new camera at APC, and there are now point-to-point fibre connections to each of the cameras, so there's much better download and upload links to those cameras so that we can remotely monitor them in a more effective way. But as they become obsolete, we will be replacing them.
so further question, I think.
Okay, James says thanks.
So I think that's okay. Shall we, in that case, shall we now move on to the next item on the agenda, to receive the Treasurer's report?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Matt Barnes. A lot of you will already know me from previous years. I've been on the estate for about 10 years. I've been treasurer for about 3/4 of that time. So I've done many of these AGMs. If anybody else would like to do one, please do let me know. I am hopefully about to hit the screen share button to get my slides up. Hopefully someone will shout if they have failed to go up. I can no longer
all clear, all good.
see as much as I could before. It's always wonderful to be kind of talking at a blank screen. I remember the days when we could meet in person at Ashley School. Anyway, parts of this presentation will repeat what I may have said year in, year out in the past, that some of the attendees today will be new to the estate. Other bits are new and very specifically related to some of the boundaries demarcation proposals that you've been hearing about. So first of all, the key objective, we own our own roads, we maintain our own roads, we will periodically replace our own roads. The roads were last replaced something like sort of 15 years ago or something like that, before my time. And we need to meet our regular outgoes every year, but particularly we need to accumulate a fund to replace the roads from bottom to top, and we want to do it at a high quality, as high as we've got at the moment, perhaps higher. The numbers in this statement are essentially an estimate, but they are an estimate that was based on conversations with our preferred contractor, a firm called Spade Oak, who performed the last repairs, and have done a lot of other local work to a high standard. And they gave a sort of a quote or an estimate for what it would cost to replace the roads now, and we've added some estimated future inflation. Now, of course, inflation is rocketing this year, although that is sort of an energy and food crisis, primarily caused by the Ukraine war. Really, the road replacement cost is partly down to the cost of employing people, but also substantially oil. And oil prices move up and down a lot. The oil underlies tarmac. So this is an estimate we have now. We need to work towards some kind of projection or forecast, but we will reproject, reforecast that every year based on the latest information we have. And also the road replacement date is also an estimate. Spade Oak indicated that the roads would last more than 5 or 6 years. So this 2027 is kind of a lower bound, we believe, on that, as long as we do small periodic repairs in the meantime. And there was some repairs done in the last about 6 months ago, and we would probably do another small set of repairs in a few years' time. So we believe that the roads will not need full replacement until 2027, but again, we'll keep that under review. And what hurts the roads particularly is very, very large, heavy vehicles traversing them. So the more sort of homes that get knocked down and rebuilt, probably the quicker the roads will degrade, but the less the roads are used by heavy vehicles, the longer they'll last. So I don't want to labour the point, but that is kind of one of the main reasons why we're here as a committee and as APRA, is to pool our community resources to deliver projects like this. The accounts were circulated by email earlier this year. The accounts relate to a period from September to August. So they showed a balance sheet at the end of August 2021 and the income and expenditure over the 12 months up to that point. Normally, I would rather the accounts are available and presented to an AGM relatively swiftly after the accounting year end. Enough time for our accountants to put them together, but not so much time that they kind of become a bit unfresh. In this case, I'd already given a bit of a summary of those accounts at the part 2 of last year's AGM towards the end of last year. So you already had the headlines then. The accounts were then circulated to all members a few months ago by email. They've been submitted to Companies House. So if you don't like them, it's getting a bit late now to do anything about it. The biggest headline from these accounts was that we made a loss over those 12 months of about 100k. This was primarily due to court costs as an exceptional item. The accounts would have been in surplus if it were not for those costs. And we had a net reserve of about 275,000. So that's a larger pot of money we have, but netted off from that anything we owe to people, such as developers' deposits. A couple of things that weren't in those accounts, but which we know we have spent money on subsequently. One was the fibre broadband. It's covered in some depth in both parts of the AGM last year, and there was very positive member votes for that. So that came at a cost that we paid for work just after August year end, so it couldn't feature in those accounts, and that will be in the 2021-22 accounts, and also those road repairs in late 2021 is another significant item appear in the current year's accounts. This is a summary of the Treasurer's section of the written committee report that you all had in advance of this meeting. Hopefully I've pulled out some of the main items other than the financial projections and the recommended subscriptions, which I'll cover in further slides. This is a summary of our budgeting. We actually have a spreadsheet that budgets for each of the next 6 or 7 years. This is the forecast for the year we are currently living through, 2021-22. The subscriptions that we will have drawn in that accounting year are still somewhat subject to the votes later today, but there's an estimate there that assumes a positive vote in due course. The other income is mainly the development fees that we levy on people that rebuild their house or to some extent build extensions. But there's a small amount there of other fees we charge, such as to buyers and sellers of properties for deeds and questions they may ask. And there's a dribble of bank interest, but that's now a very small item since interest rates have been so low. It's entirely possible that we will slightly exceed that number in the current year, but we make an estimate, and over the long term, we expect perhaps about 45k of development fees every year. That can be vastly exceeded if there are many developments, but I do remember during my tenure as treasurer, we had several years in a trot where there was very little development, and we were getting very little development income. So I prefer not to place undue reliance on that. And then in the expenditure section, we now have the great assistance of both Greg and his firm GCS, and Fiona, that's been our administrator for some time. So we pay them for their excellent services. In the current year, we had the road repairs. It's not so much a one-off, because I expect we will do the same every few years, but it's certainly not an annually recurring item. And then we had budgets for professional fees, which is occasional legal advice, but it's also the auditor, occasionally surveyor and other types of advice like that. What I call landscaping, that's the gardener that mows some of the verges, near the gates particularly, as well as tree surgeons attending to damaged trees and that sort of thing. The CCTV there includes the cost of maintaining them, engaging the firm that was mentioned earlier called Vision On. It includes powering them, it includes broadband costs for them, and there's also an allowance there for the periodic upgrades that Tej mentioned. We can't necessarily afford to have the premium cameras at all times, but we certainly do expect to replace them on sort of a rolling program. Sundries is another bucket that covers a lot of things. One of them is a dribble of tax we pay on our investment income. Another one is the cost of the AGM. And also we expect in the current accounting year to be cleaning the gullies, which is something we are responsible for as road owner, and which sometimes need doing annually, sometimes less often. So the expectation is that in the current accounting year, we will produce a surplus, or at least an operating surplus, as I describe it, to the extent that we choose to carry forward the boundaries demarcation project. Then there would obviously be a large expenditure in the accounting year that could tip that operating surplus into a net deficit for the current year if members vote in favour of it. I mentioned we perform this budgeting and we include the expected development income and all our expected operating costs. We have also in our forecast this year included an expected fee in respect of a plot split. That plot split was agreed in 2020 and discussed in that AGM, but it's taken some time to come to fruition because it was initially refused by EBC, but then accepted on appeal. So that is now more likely than not to go ahead, and then we'll generate the fee if it does so. I had at last year's AGM, in light of all the discussions about broadband, about boundaries demarcation and other projects, flagged that we might end up charging between 800 and 1200 of subscriptions every year if the members vote in favour of those projects. And I had suggested at the time that we might split that into half-yearly amounts to help member cash flows for those that prefer to smooth their outgoes, but also to help APRA, because it's more useful for us to receive income in smaller chunks to better match timing of our outgo. The update, looking at the facts and figures now, is that if members do approve the boundary demarcation, which is the next item on the agenda, then we would propose to charge an extra £300 almost immediately now. And then we would charge a further £500 in September, that being the first half of a £1,000 subscription for the 2022-23 accounting year. These amounts are designed to effectively goal seek to match our forecast expenditure, both on the capital projects and the normal running costs. Charging the extra in May helps us accumulate some cash ahead of signing those contracts over the summer. So the subscriptions will be voted for later in the meeting, following the boundaries demarcation vote. This slide, barring its final sentence, is assuming that that vote gains approval, and in that case we would intend to charge £300 per property in May. That's for all properties other than 4 that are kind of outside the gates on the periphery. In addition, the subscriptions for the 2022-23 accounting year would be per the table. We don't get a single number that I can use in a soundbite, but I would tend to focus on the number in the bottom right, because most of our members do pay by direct debit, and the bulk of the properties are in the lower row. But historically, some properties have paid lower subs, either where they're in Ashley Park Crescent, or in a couple of cases where they straddle or are outside the gate boundaries. If the boundaries demarcation vote is not approved, then we will not charge the amount in row 1, and we will charge subscriptions for the following year per the table, but £300 lower in each case, or at least for the bottom 2 rows in the table. But we will come back to that vote in due course. This slide was just an attempt to better characterise those annual subscriptions against our costs. Broadly £450 per annum per property for that most common group of properties that pay direct debit and pay the higher amount. That they would be making about £450 per annum that covers the annual budgeted costs, the gardening, the administration, all those other things that were on the earlier slide. About £50 per annum goes towards the triennial road repairs, and the projection requires about £800 per annum per property towards the projected funding of the road replacement. And we also target to reach that point in 2027 with some roads and with a bit of surplus left over, rather than scraping the bottom of the barrel. So one reaches a subscription for the most common group of properties are about 1,400, but because we have these other sources of income, particularly the development fees, there is a subsidy of sorts that as long as those development fees do indeed arise, then we are able to recommend subscriptions only at £1,000 per member. And what this kind of highlights to you is, if any of the assumptions on the page are wrong, then the subscriptions in future years would be higher or lower. So if the roads don't need replacing so soon, or they do, maybe they cost more, that would increase or decrease the amount we have to raise for the road replacement, and so the subs would change. If the development fees double or they disappear, then that could be quite material to the subscriptions we need to charge in due course. The forecast assumes that subscriptions will rise 5% per annum going forwards. That's been the rate of increase that we've adopted about the last decade. And we would intend to try to do that going forwards. But obviously we would review every year the state offer finances and the state offer projections at each point. And so there's a pretty picture here. If the boundaries demarcation is not approved, then homes would be paying about £700 each, and we would project to follow the dark blue line, where our current 270,000 rises to over 800,000 and then gets spent on the roads. If the members do support the demarcation plan, then we would charge £1,000 per annum. Our reserves would be slightly depleted in the current year, but then would grow to a similar degree to get up to that 800 level to pay for the roads. And then I've invented some downside scenarios where some of our income doesn't appear, and we follow a lesser line. But in fact, we wouldn't ever allow ourselves to actually go negative. We would either ask members to pay more subscriptions, or we would defer the road replacement. We don't actually need to make ourselves insolvent at any point. I see there are there's one or more questions come through, but only by seizing a screen share can I see that, which I think I will do now.
I think you're let off the hook, actually, Matt. I think the questions are being answered by Nigel because they seem to be with respect to something that he's going to be covering.
Okay.
The gates, yeah.
So it used to be, in the early days, I'd stand up in the AGM in person in Ashley School and people would actually ask me questions. I think I've bored everybody to death since then. Is there anything at all anybody would like to ask about the accounts, the financial forecast, or the subscriptions? If there are not, then we will pass to Greg shortly to seek a vote on the accounts. We will not immediately vote on the subscriptions, but we will look at the boundaries demarcation vote first and then come back to the subscriptions after that.
We have a question from Mark Lay that may be for you, Matt.
Will the new 1,300 figure be the new baseline ongoing? Mark has asked. I will just share that screen again. So the proposal here is that we charge an extra 300 in the current year. So most members have paid 600 so far in the current year, which was charged to members at the end of September last year. If you remember, we do an accounting year from September to August. So that in that 12-month period, we will have charged 600 plus 300, making 900 to the direct debit payers. And then in the current September to August period, we will be, sorry, in the next September to August period, from September 2022 to August 2023, we will be charging this 1,000 figure. So you mustn't add the 300 to the 1,000. 300 lies in the current year, the 1,000 lies in the following accounting year. But then thereafter, the projection assumes that 1,000 escalates at 5% per annum through the remainder of the forecast. So that's the new baseline, if you like. I think people have had enough of me, and therefore I think I might safely pass to Greg for the vote on the accounts.
Okay, thank you, Matt. As Matt said, the accounts were circulated, the full set of accounts were circulated earlier in the year, and Matt has summarised them within his Treasurer's report. So we're now going to have a vote, first vote of the evening, and the vote is on item 6 of the agenda to adopt the annual accounts and report of the reporting accountant for the year ending 31st of August 2021. So you should have some voting panels come up on your screens. We will allow a few moments for people to vote, and then I will calculate them along with the proxy votes and give you the result of the resolution.
We've currently got 89% people voted that are eligible to do so, 91%, 93%. We have 93% people that can vote to vote. So I'm going to end the poll at this point, if you're happy with that, Greg.
Yes, thanks, James.
And I'm going to share the results with everybody so they can see them. And for those of you that can't see that because you only get them as a percentage outside, the live vote was 40 people going for, so that 91% count is 40 people, and there were 4 people abstaining. One of which I will admit was me, because I have to view it so I can see what you guys are up to on the outside as well.
Thank you, James. So the cumulative vote, including the proxies, we have 80 members in favour of the motion and 1 against. So that calculates to 99% approval. So the resolution is carried. I think we go back to the chairs now.
We do, and just put you back to Tej to introduce Nigel, I believe.
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks to Matt for the excellent Treasurer's report, and thanks to Greg for running that poll. And now on to the main event of this evening, which is Nigel Stapleton for the Project Delivery Group.
Nigel, you're on mute.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Tej, for the introduction. The reason I'm giving this presentation is that the Project Delivery Group has been in place since January of this year. It was preceded by the Project Working Party that was set up to focus on the boundaries demarcation back in July 2020. But because the work of delivery is rather different from the work on project design and scope, we've introduced a rather different membership for the Project Delivery Group. One member of the council, Brian Welsh, has been a member. Greg Smith, as our estate manager, is a member, and there are 3 other residents, including myself, who have experience of conducting a tender of this sort of complexity as the other members of the group. I expect we'll generate, and I hope we generate, a number of questions from this presentation. I would invite you to log your questions as I go through the presentation, and if there is quite a big backlog, then I will pause and clear some of the questions as we go along, if they're not already answered later in the presentation. Quite a few of the slides that I'm using, and I'd ask to move on to the next slide, you have seen before, because we have had presentations at every AGM since December 2020 on this important subject. So some slides I will linger on, this slide in particular. Other slides I will go through more quickly because the issues have been covered in earlier AGM discussions. A number of questions have come up challenging whether gates or barriers which open to all vehicles and motorcycles are really going to improve security and the ambience of the estate. And suggestions have been made that we should have gone for fob control of some of the gates. All these, I can assure members, are options that the Project Working Party have looked at very, very carefully. And there have been two clear messages from the majority of members who have given us feedback. One was that they did not want the estate to become a fortress with an awful lot of control over entry. And the second was that they did not want to see existing traffic flows disrupted or change from what they are at present. And one of the questions that has been posted by Jeff Brown was saying fob control for the Charlotte's Gate and to the Tudor Gate, and let every delivery vehicle through the Spur Gate. That is exactly what feedback from members said shouldn't happen. The existing traffic flows are working pretty well, and we are not a rat run of an awful lot of residents and non-residents trying to avoid traffic congestion. And therefore, we believe this proposal addresses what the majority of residents have said they wanted. We have looked as a Project Working Party over the past 2 years, nearly 2 years, at the experience of other estates. And other estates who have just put in automatic number plate recognition without any barriers or anything else have seen a significant increase in the security in terms of the deterrence that AMPR has of people who are entering the estate with ill intent. So security we can tick basically because the AMPR is a proven deterrent. The pedestrian gates, although they will open to all residents, is a potentially less attractive way of residents getting into the estate through the very unsafe way that most often do at the present moment, i.e. challenging and walking into vehicles coming in through the entrances. So what I must assure members who are skeptical about this proposal is that we have learnt very good lessons from looking at the experience of other estates. We're the only one that does not have clear demarcation, and yet being on a straight line between the railway station and the town centre, you could reasonably argue that we're the one that should most have demarcation. What I think is a really important thing to bear in mind is that over the past 10 years, 500 new dwellings were built within 600 meters of the estate, this estate boundaries. In 22, this year alone, with the commissioning of major developments in Stompond Lane and on the old Birdseye site, we are already seeing 550 new apartments and residences coming into effect. And at Elmbridge, who have just issued a draft local plan, see another 300 at the very least, including 200 on the home-based site, over the next 5 years in their local plan. I think there's a bit of an analogy here to what the Dutch are doing to mitigate rising sea levels from climate change. They're raising the dikes. We are putting in some pretty effective boundaries demarcation to try and maintain the safety of people that use our roads, not to stop them, but to certainly stem the rising tide. That very clearly is the logic behind this proposal. And I think we can strongly demonstrate that improved pedestrian and vehicle safety and security of our properties will be achieved in a very visible way from this project. Let's move to the next slide, which I'm going to go over very quickly, but it's just to remind members that we have involved you all the way through the development of these plans and have taken, obviously not the feedback from everybody, because there are obviously a number of minority opinions, which is difficult to harmonize with the feedback that we've got from the majority. But it cannot be said that we have not consulted and taken note of your feedback, and we're very grateful of the level of support that we've got from the votes that have been taken at the 3 most recent AGMs preceding this one. Now, the tender process, which you authorized us to undertake back in December of last year, has been a pretty successful process. All but 3 of the 12 companies that we approached to put in a tender submitted very detailed proposals. We handled it as a 2-stage tender, not giving an absolutely cast iron specification of everything we wanted, but just telling them what our proposals were, what sort of equipment we wanted to see at each of the 4 entrances, and took an awful lot of notice of the very specialist knowledge that those that submitted tenders gave us as feedback. And here again, we have a bit of an advantage of being last of all the local estates in terms of thinking about boundaries demarcation, because technology has changed very significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. And one of the benefits of not having that rigid specification until we got the feedback from the tender process is that we are clearly able to incorporate into our plans technology which, for those that did this work 4 or 5 years ago, would not have been able to achieve. So it's been a very rigorous process. On-site visits, Zoom interviews with the majority of the companies that submitted tenders. And it's one, obviously, where the council members have undertaken a very detailed and rigorous review of the recommendations coming from the project delivery group. If we move on to the recommendations that are being brought to this meeting, we did have 2 companies out of those 12 who said that they could deliver the whole project. But when we looked at the experience that they brought in terms of specialist knowledge, we decided that it would be better to separate amongst 3 different parties to deliver the complete project. Anserdor, whose chairman I will be introducing in a moment, doing the largest and most expensive piece of the work, i.e. installing the rising barriers, the associated control mechanisms, the pedestrian gates, and where necessary, new fencing. AS Ashcroft, who is well known to many of us because they do residential properties as well as commercial contracts, to do the civil works and the specialist groundworks, and Vision On, who you don't see very regularly, but are actually a very trusted supplier to the estate because they have installed over the last several years and maintained with a very good service all the CCTV cameras that we have at the 5 gates for entrances to the estate. Obviously, the project delivery group thought very carefully about how we could coordinate the work being done by 3 different parties. And the answer to that is that it's not like when you're completing your house and there are several contractors working at the same time who have to be scheduled together. As the bottom part of this slide on, I don't think you changed the slide, James, sorry, I should have. As the bottom part of this slide shows, Ashcroft will come in first and do the civil works and the trenching required for Anserdor's equipment to be installed. Anserdor will then do all the work, including traffic lights, intercoms, pedestrian gates, and finally Vision On will install the AMPR cameras, the display panels to show the registration numbers of incoming vehicles, and a new CCTV for the Ashley Park Crescent entrance. If we move to the next slide, and I first of all correct the spelling error, although I hope you will accept that all our decisions and recommendations are rational. Actually, this slide is talking about the rationale rather than rational. The important point here is that price alone has not dictated our recommendations. We could have been recommending to you, particularly for the barriers, cheaper equipment, but cheapness does not often, in the overall context of something like this that needs to operate very reliably, to have very good longevity, cheapness is not your best option. So what we've tried to do is to balance the price quotations against equipment reliability, longevity, prior experience in delivering projects such as this, project management skills, and track record on after-sales service. The rising barriers are going to be manufactured by FAC, who have their headquarters down in Basingstoke. They are a premium quality supplier, widely used, and what was interesting to us is that 3 of the 5 companies that tendered for this part of the project recommended the same FAC equipment. Ashcroft is well known and has strong credentials for the civil works and the specialist groundworks. And I'm now going to ask James to spotlight in aside me the chairman of Anserdor, Francis Davis. Davy. Has Francis come in? Because I can't see him on the screen.
I can see and hear you. Can you see and hear me?
He's on, Nigel.
Yep, he's on.
Yep,
okay.
He's on next to you.
Hello.
Beneath you, actually, beneath you.
Francis, why don't you just briefly introduce Anserdor to the members present at the meeting, and say a little bit about your thoughts about the scope of the equipment that we're specifying for the your part of the overall project.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you all for spending the time and listening to me. Just a little bit about me and the company. Anserdor is 40 years old, or it will be in November, so we've been at this for a while. We're based in Wimbledon and formerly in Wandsworth, and we service London and the home counties. Our speciality is access control and CCTV and automatics, automatic barriers, automatic doors. And we'd like to think we've got the hang of it now. The previous projects we've delivered, just to give you some idea of what we do, is we've completed a complete replacement of the CCTV system for the Old Bailey. We've completely replaced all the security systems for Great Ormond Street Hospital, which I think was about just under £2 million. And we have undertaken a series of projects throughout London and the home counties, automatic doors, automatic barriers, and so forth. When I first looked at this project, I think it was Tej that I met actually, and COVID doesn't exist. So, it gives you an idea how long this has been going on for. I've always said from the outset that the success of the project in terms of its delivery was down to 3 things, and that's the quality and knowledge of the people that install the barriers, the quality of the project management, in other words, my project manager that delivers the project for you guys. If they're good, they will deliver it and it will become seamless and you won't really know what's going on. And that's why we always employ good project managers, because everything else rises and falls upon that. And then once the work is complete, what we absolutely must do is to deliver you good service. In other words, if the thing goes wrong or somebody wallops one of the barriers, these things will occasionally happen, is that you get swift service. Somebody arrives quickly with all the parts, puts it right, and normal service is resumed as quickly as possible. And that's what we do. That's why we exist, and that's why we still are here 40 years after the event. We do take great care in what we do, and we'd like to think that, the reason all these customers keep coming back to us after all these years, is that we have good knowledge of what we do. There was mention prior to Matt talking about the finances of all this. It's security, because I've done this many, many years. Security is a percentage game. You can get 100% security, but you wouldn't be very popular with the residents of Wilton-on-Thames, because you would have tailbacks while everybody is interrogated at the front entrance. You can have slightly more relaxed security, but I think, frankly, the way you guys have done it is about right. You're never going to get 100% security, but if you're stopping people, they're pausing and they're allowed entry, and you're capturing their number plate and you're capturing their pictures and you're controlling access into the 4 main access points of the development, you've gone a long way towards creating a good, decent, quiet, sophisticated area, which isn't a gated community, because that has some fairly difficult connotations, but you're going to get real benefit. You're going to stop cars speeding through, mostly, I'm sure. You're going to stop people trying to burgle the place, because you've got to be a brave burglar to go through all those main entrances and then still go and burgle a house. So it's a percentage game at the end of the day, and I'm quite sure that when the dust has settled and the installation is complete, you will see good value from what you're doing. I am available for any questions. I'm conscious that everybody has time constraints. If there's any questions that I can answer now or later, just let me know.
Yeah, well, we're monitoring, Francis, the questions coming up, and if there are any that come up that particularly come into your field of
Expertise.
interest, then but I mean, actually, you've answered much more convincingly than I did what a big impact this project can have, notwithstanding the fact that we're not creating a fortress. We are creating a barrier against rising tides, to use my analogy. And AMPR in particular will be a very strong security enhancement. Let's move on to the next slide, because the next slide, James, mine hasn't changed on this. Ah, right. When I was a CEO, the question that I always asked, and therefore I'm sure a number of you at this meeting will be asking, is what are the risks to this project if you give us your approval to go ahead with it? And I can assure you that both the project working party and more recently the project delivery group have been focusing very, very hard on risk mitigation. And most importantly, to having barriers which are going to be extremely reliable and not a cause of irritation to residents and non-residents alike. That's one of the reasons why we chose FAC. Not only do they have versus other comparators better longevity, they also have operate with much lower power consumption. There are backup batteries which will return the barriers to the open position in the event of a fault. Their response times or ANSADAR's response times for fault repair are very prompt, and the installation has a 24-month guarantee in any event. Inflation, the Treasurer commented about inflation and its impact in his own presentation. We, as a delivery group, were asking those that tendered back in January for fixed prices valid through till the mid up to 6 months. So although there is clearly pretty heavy inflation down the line, we have protection against that. The issue that is troubling us at the moment clearly is that particularly because we're thinking of using laser beams instead of the older technology of induction loops to activate the barriers. Laser beams have semiconductors, and those semiconductors, just like when we order a new car, are in short supply with longer lead times. So it may well be the case that we find that we would use the induction loops which are proven technology in other estates as an alternative if supply constraints do hit us. And obviously we won't know that until until we place an order. There's an important slide coming up for members about the costings, which we're now confident on which to enable the delivery of this project. And in the far right-hand column is a figure that featured prominently in the presentation back in last December, 304,100. The number that is being put forward for approval at this meeting is 265, and that's in the column immediately to the left. And you've got the comparisons as to the results that we have achieved from the tender process. And it's noteworthy that that 265 has included within it 18,000 pounds, which was not part of the estimate back in December. One is to install CCTV cameras, which do not currently exist at the Ashley Park Crescent entrance. And the other, to take one of the points that was made, I think, by James Spalding earlier, that our current CCTV cameras are now getting very outdated. We did mention back at the December meeting that we would be replacing the cameras at the entrances as on a as needed basis, and the Charlotte Gates ones are probably most in need in terms of upgrading. So effectively, we're talking about a project because of the success of the tender process, which, notwithstanding inflation being a lot higher than expected, is we're getting more and we're spending nearly £40,000 less than we put forward in December. Scheduling, if there's agreement today, we would be entering into contracts pretty damn quickly. And Ashcroft, as I showed from the, could we move to the next slide? Ashcroft would be first on site, and they would be working only at one gate at a time, starting with the Tudor Gate and moving northwards from there. Obviously, the nature of the civil works at each of the entrances requires closure for a period, and that I'll be talking about the structural changes to the Tudor Gate later. That is a longer lead time than the other two gates. And then Anserdor would quickly come in after Ashcroft have done the civil works, and that Anserdor think that their whole installation at each gate could be done within a week. And then Vision On would come and do the AMPR cameras, which obviously can be done without any closures. And if you put all that together, we would have all four entrances in working order, provided there was no delays from weather or equipment shortages in early October. Next slide, please, systems operation costs, relatively modest because of the low power usage of the FAC barriers, and obviously we would be doing all the recommended routine maintenance. One of the savings that we've been able to achieve is that clearly there will need to be intercoms at each of the entrances so that in the event of any problems, people can communicate with the control center. And instead of the old technology of using SIM cards, having this arrangement with Box to be able to use their ultra-fast broadband in a private network is not only very helpful in terms of better quality CCTV, it also means that we don't have to use SIM cards and pay SIM card monthly subscriptions for all the intercoms. So we're talking about incremental costs in an operating sense, not exceeding 8,000 per year. And it depends who we choose as a control center and the usage of it as to how much additional there is for that. But the number on this slide is certainly a well topside figure. There have been a couple of questions that have come up that before my summing up, I would just like to address. Daniel Harmon has said, what's the benefit of having pedestrian gates when they have no access controls, just having a gap? First thing is that one of the most dangerous things in this estate at the present moment is people that like to use our roads to accelerate their cycling speeds. And cyclists will have to dismount and pedestrians will have to push a button and in doing so acknowledge their compliance with our state rules and regulations, which at the present moment they probably never even think about. So having the pedestrian gates and rather than just leaving a gap is I think a very desirable thing to have. Andrew Williams has said at the AGM we asked for £10,000 up to that for the tender process. The answer is that because much more work has been done by APRA residents volunteering their specialist skills, the amount that we will be spending is around half that amount. Trevor Sherwood has said that he was disappointed in rising barriers rather than nice big gates. The reason why we went for rising barriers, I think, was very clearly explained to members as long back as December 2020. Firstly, because gates go against that mentality of wanting to avoid looking like a fortress. But most importantly, the opening times for rising barriers will be less than 4 or 5 seconds. And gates are considerably slower than that. We've all got experience of that with our own gates at our homes. So that's the reason why we recommended rising barriers, which are used very successfully at all our other neighbouring estates. Jeff Brown said that the gates at Ashley Rise have a cost of around 20,000. So perhaps on the figures I've just shown, what we are providing is much more expensive. Clearly, what we are providing is considerably more significant in terms of the benefits that it brings for an entrance which has massively greater volumes than the ones at Ashley Rise and doesn't have any AMPR or anything else. So actually, the comparison that you've given us, Jeff, makes the sort of costings that we have come up with, I think, look very reasonable. I'm coming on to answer a Trevor question on the Tudor gates. Jim Peterson has said that you do not have permission to proceed with the contract till a vote was taken. I thought all my comments made that pretty obvious, but if they didn't, I apologize, Jim. Jim Peterson seems to be doing some rather facetious questions. He says pedestrian burglars are welcome. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. We will have cameras and we will have better quality cameras. And in that sense, pedestrian gates, rather than pedestrians being able to come in without any restrictions over the roads, is certainly helping. Proving, final slide. And then I'm going on to the appendix to talk briefly about the Tudor Gate and the Ashley Park Crescent Gate, but not the other items on the slides in the appendix. I don't think there's much to add to what this slide, final slide, really just pulls together. Firstly, what I've said earlier in terms of the benefits from the project, and what the Treasurer has said earlier about the upcoming resolution on members' subscriptions. So I won't dwell on that slide. What I'd like to do is to fast forward in the appendix to the Tudor Gate, the widening of the entrance to allow two-way traffic. So could we show, just put on the screen, James, that picture. The problem is that there is an increasing volume of traffic coming through the Tudor Gate, and it is situated on the busiest part of Ashley Road in terms of other road junctions, etc. And certainly we would have had a lot of difficulty in getting planning permission if there was one way, if there was not, as there are at the other entrances, in and out separate barriers. And to do that without taking out the widening the road to create by taking out those outer turrets would not have been possible. Trevor never shared with us what he has said as a question, namely that he did a survey with residents on the Tudor Gate, and 30 of the 40 felt that they should not be partly demolished. Trevor, we were aware of the survey. We were aware, you never shared with us the results of your survey until now. But to be perfectly frank, if you'd surveyed each of the members of the project working party, we would have said that we would have hoped to be able to retain the outer turrets, but there was no way of doing that and making it a in-out entrance. We talked, so, you know, to ask whether you'd like to keep them, but not clearly evaluate what alternatives could allow you to keep them. You were talking about moving the barriers further into the estate, which would then mean that certain residents would, who are within the estate, would, in terms of boundaries, come outside the estate. You then talked about wanting to make it either entrance only or exit only. And when we talk to people about that concept, people living in parts of Silverdale Avenue were very unattracted to that option. And by landscaping improvements, etc., we are confident that we can get the right sort of solution on boundaries protection and still retain a very attractive appearance of that Tudor gate. So yes, we would have preferred to be coming up with a different solution, but this is unfortunately a necessary piece of what was necessary to get planning permission and to keep what residents strongly said they wanted, no disruption to present access or exit routes into the estate. I'm looking at other questions before I shut up. John Bowden is sort of asking whether we could ramp up levels by adding key codes, fobs, ANPR enabled entry. As I answer that really as I started, that we are listening to what residents have told us. They do not want, unless it becomes absolutely necessary, to make us a fortress. They'd want to mitigate the effects of what is happening around us. And so all the evidence that we've got from the impact of these sort of demarcation measures being installed in other estates would suggest that this answer should be an enduring answer to give residents what they want. Andrew has asked whether we looked at creating the same looks entrance at the other gates as there is at the Tudor gate to create a more uniform set of entrances. Well, we haven't had uniformity up till now, Andrew, and the cost of making the whole estate look like the Tudor estate would be pretty astronomical. So the answer is, I'm afraid we didn't look at it. I don't know. Okay. Can members of the council tell me if there's other questions which I should have answered, because I've had to go through quite a lot, or can we move to move on and take the vote? Can I get guidance from the two co-chairs?
Yep.
I don't think I've got any other questions that were raised via email. No. Tej?
Yep, correct. I don't think there was any other questions.
I think there's,
So,
I think
so my
John Bowden's
summary
one
would be,
further question.
sorry?
Yeah, John Bowden, I'm just reading the Q&A, and John Bowden is saying that what your answer to his question wasn't quite what he asked. Please read out the full question as it refers to what was discussed and proposed before. I don't recall any discussion at any residents' meetings saying we don't want other levels of entry.
Well,
I'm not sure.
the proposal, what I am saying is that the Project Working Party first produced a report to residents in October 2020. This was the proposal then. This is the proposal now. And from my perspective, we have never had a whole lot of people saying, please make my access into the estate still more difficult by me having to register on an APNR system, my registration numbers, etc., etc. We were asked to try and achieve the objectives that were on my first slide with in the least cost and the least intrusive way. And that is what consistently we have said, and literally this is being, as best I can remember, being asked for the first time when we have made 3 presentations which have been on the same theme.
Nigel, I'd probably just add, just looking at John's original, John Bowden's original question, I think he was also asking about future upgradability. Obviously, in the current proposals, we're not looking to have any access controls, but obviously the hardware for the barriers will be there and in place, and additional hardware would need to be installed in order to add access controls. But obviously doing that would be a lot easier than starting from scratch, and there would be provisions in place. But I would just like to stress that there are no access controls being proposed at this stage.
And we can also say that obviously by having lasers and AMPR, we have equipment which could be used for that purpose, but that is not the proposal which is being put to the meeting. Do you want any summing up, Tej, or
I think Jim,
John before?
Jim Peterson's also asking, can we make clear what percentage of residents need to vote for this for it to proceed? So as it's ordinary business for the company, the percentage required would be 50%, but obviously, you know, the support that we've had from members at previous meetings would suggest that we should see a higher percentage than 50, and we would hope to see that as well. So I'll hand over to Nigel to sum up.
Okay, well, I mean, you strongly supported us to go through to the tender process on the sort of specification and design that is being put to you now. There is a change at the Ashley Park Crescent Gate, where we have conformed the design to that of the other entrances, whereas previously we were going to narrow the access through the stone pillars and just have one rising barrier. But that design change has come as a number of less obvious changes have come from all the feedback that we got through the tender process. So the tender process has yielded us good results in terms of better pricing, and the amount of time that has been put into risk mitigation and making sure that we can deliver this and on time and on budget should be additional assurance to members. I appreciate that some members would like it differently, but I can assure you that there has been no closed minds within the project working party to that sort of feedback. It is just that the project working party have gone into options in such detail that we hopefully can persuade members that with all the conflicting issues and considerations that we have to take into account, this is undoubtedly the best way forward, with future-proofing, as John Bowden would like to see, certainly an important consideration that is reflected in the sort of configurations that are being put in place, if, Jim, you vote in favour of it. So that's my summing up.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel, for that very thorough description of all the issues and all the work you've done. I just want to reiterate that the proposal, given all the updates you've presented to the Council of Management along the way, has the full support of the Council. And before we move to a vote, which we'll do shortly, I would like to recommend it to the members. As Nigel says, that it is the best solution for a wide range of conflicting issues, both for residents, for planning authorities, and so on. So can we now move, James, could you bring up the voting panel? And Greg, would you supervise the vote?
Thank you all. So we now, as we said, we come to the second vote of the evening, and the resolution is: approval is sought for the council to incur expenditure of up to £265,000 to deliver the barriers and demarcation project to the Tudor, Spur and Charlotte entrances on Ashley Road and the Ashley Park Crescent entrance on Ashley Park Avenue. So I think the panel is up now. If you'd like to vote, and again, we'll give you a few moments to complete the vote, and then I'll announce the results.
Back up to our 44 out of 49 people voting. So I'm going to end the poll here and display the results to you all. And the results are as follows: 80% for. This is on the live poll. Obviously, these will need to be adjusted with the proxies. 13% against and 7% abstaining. Admittedly, one of those is me, because I have to. So you've got 36 people for, 6 people against, and 2 people abstaining.
Okay, thank you, James. Adding in the proxy votes, that means that we've got 70 in favour of the proposal, 13 against, which gives you a vote of 84% in favour, so the resolution passes. I think what we're going to do now is move on. Now that we've established that resolution has passed, we're going to move on to the vote on the subscriptions. I'm going to ask Matt to share his screen just to remind us of the subscription levies for the appropriate properties. Thank you, Matt. So what you're being asked to vote on here is to increase the 2021 levy by £300, which will be payable on or around 31st of May 2022, and to vote for the increase in the 2022-23 levy, which will be for most properties, bar the exception one where there's the 4 properties which don't pay and the 20 properties which have the subsidised level. Other than that, it will be the level of £1,000 for the 2022-23 year. So if we can have the voting panel, James.
Currently have 43 out of the 49 who are able to vote. Looks like we're not getting that last one. So I'm going to pause that there. 87% of people who can vote have voted. And the results are as follows. 74% of people, that's 32 people, are for the motion. 16%, that's 7 people, are against it, and 3 people abstaining.
Thank you, James. So that means there's a total of 72 votes in favour of the motion. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I've got the wrong figures there. One moment. Beg your pardon. 67 in favour of the motion with 13 against, giving 84% approval, so the motion is carried. So I think we're going to go back to the chairs now.
I believe we are. So let me put you back to John and to spotlighting John for this one, I believe.
Well, thank you very much for that, everyone. Great deal of work and effort has gone into reaching this point. Now we'll come to item number 9. We'll be asking you to vote on membership of the council. There are 3 members, as is normal under the articles, standing for re-election under the rotation system, and we'll ask you to vote separately on each one. So approval is sought to reappoint Rakesh Muria, to reappoint Brian Welsh, and to reappoint Matt Tanner White. So once again, James, if you could bring up the panel, and Greg, if you would supervise.
Thank you, John. Where you can cast your votes.
You'll find all 3 together. All 3 are up there together.
We're dealing with all 3 together, as
yeah, well, no, as I say, they're individually. You have to just remember you may have to scroll down to find the 3rd person. So,
thanks, James.
and we have 43 out of 48, 44 out of 48 people voting. And I'm going to end the poll then, as 44 has been our key number. And I'm going to share the results. And for Rakesh Muria, we have 36 votes for, 2 against and 5 abstaining. For Matt Tanner White, you have 36 for, 2 against and 5 abstaining. And for Brian Welsh, you have 27 for, 13 against and 3 abstaining.
Okay, thank you, James. So adding in the proxy votes, I can inform you that Rakesh Muri has been returned to the council with 76 votes in favour with 3 against, giving 96% in favour of the resolution. Matt Tanner White, again 76 votes for and 3 against, again 96% in favour of the resolution. And Brian Welsh, 65 in favour, 15 against, giving 81% in favour of the resolution. So thank you, and I'm returning you to the, all 3 are returned. So we now go back to the joint chairs, I believe.
We do.
Yes, thank you. So the last item on the agenda, is there any other business that members would like to raise at this point? I can't see anything
on my screen. John Bowden is asking, please can the AGMs return to being in person? We did obviously consider that for this AGM, given that COVID restrictions have now been lifted. I think what we found is that attendance appears to be better via Zoom, and also taking votes and counting votes is done in a much more accurate way than the show of hands that we would get in person. And asking questions.
I believe we're also doing
is also a lot better.
So I believe we're also doing a survey at the end of this meeting to ask people. I think I'm correct, aren't I, James, that we're going to ask people at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, please, everybody, when you leave, you will get a survey again. And one of the questions is actually whether you wish to continue doing this via Zoom or whether you want to do it in person in the future, at the next time round. And any other comments, obviously, that you feel that we could benefit from.
Just having a look through the questions at the moment.
Is there anything else?
Andrew Walton is asking, with Tej, i.e. me, having gone through the planning application process with APRA, does he feel this is carried out in the most effective way? Are there changes in the pipeline? There's a perception that this is a difficult process to navigate. That's certainly something that we've been working on in the council to continuously sort of evolve and improve on. And John is also very much involved in the development committee now. So there's always room to improve the process, and I think that's certainly something that we'll be looking to do in the future. Not seeing any other questions on the chat facility.
I think we'll just give it maybe another minute in case anyone comes in at the last.
Peter Devlin has come on to ask if we can make it clear tonight that we're only asking 25% of the estate if they want live or Zoom meetings. We are obviously only asking the people who are attending this meeting whether they would like in-person or Zoom meetings. But please do answer the questionnaire at the end of the session.
Yeah, we take that point. However, in one of the earlier newsletters, we did, bring up that subject and say that, well, partly that we were holding it later than we thought because of the way Easter fell this year, but also because we felt there was better attendance, and we can always, if people feel strongly, we'll always take that feedback that we might get from a newsletter. It doesn't have to be, our engagement with you, and I hope it will improve over the time to come, doesn't have to be isolated to these meetings, which are only, well, normally once a year, although the last year was different. But I would encourage people when they do have issues like that to come forward to us, whether it's in response to a newsletter or simply, contacting us via our office.
Okay. I think that pretty much wraps everything up, and we're 20 minutes over schedule, so we should probably let everyone get back to their evening. So just like to say thank you to obviously everyone that's been involved in this evening's meeting. Obviously, the PDG have done a fantastic job to get the Barriers project to where it's at. Thanks to James for hosting, and for all our fellow members of COM for all the hard work that they're doing. Please encourage everyone to get in touch on the APRA email address with any follow-up points or any follow-up thoughts that members have post this meeting.
There's one last thing we can do. If I just remove the spotlights, if everybody wants to go onto their gallery view on their laptops, they will be able to see everybody who has actually been in the room here working for you all this evening. So if I take the spotlights off our two key speakers, as I say, if you go onto gallery view, you've got me at the moment, but as I say, you should hopefully be able to see us. But if not, not to worry. Thank you very much indeed for coming, everybody. And please remember to fill in the form or respond to newsletters if you want to do it a different way next time. And hybrid is possible. You can do hybrid. It can be done whereby we can have people voting in the same way that we had this evening and still be in a room full of people as well if necessary. But there is a cost to it. So you have to bear that in mind as well. Anything further, Tej?
Nothing from me.
No, John, anything further from you?
No, thank you all very much.
It's great. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pull the plug. Thank you all very much indeed for coming. Fiona, I think you have the button to do that.